All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar. We've got several good panelists joining us today and a lot of things to talk about, so I want to jump in. The idea for this webinar came about because TaroWorks has several users who use our software to run their carbon credit programs, and that the carbon credit programs actually provide significant amounts of funding for them to help achieve their missions. And so we thought this would be an interesting topic because there are a number of other organizations that could do something similar, but carbon credit and carbon offset programs have a lot of complexities, and it's not always that easy to know where to get started. So our goal with the webinar today was to bring together a panel of people who could speak to the various aspects of implementing an offset program. And we're going to kind of dive into each of them. This webinar is not intended for experts who already know a lot about carbon credits. I think it's going to be better suited for organizations who might be just beginning to explore or who have thought about exploring it and have not done much research. So we want to both sort of give a kind of broad background of the different factors that are involved without attempting to give you the step-by-step process of what needs to happen. And one of the important aspects of the carbon offset programs from our perspective is there's a number of different factors that come into play, from the program design and implementation and then what you actually do on the ground. And so I'm very excited that we have a great panel that joined us today that can sort of speak to all these different aspects. So I want to have each of our panel members introduce themselves here and talk about it, but I also want to say first a big thank you to Stephen for getting up very early in the morning, and to Jennifer for staying up very late at night. We have people on the call from Denver, Colorado, all the way to Phnom Penh, Cambodia, so it's quite a range of time zones, and it's not convenient for everybody. So very thanks for the late morning and the early morning and late evening to everybody. And what I will do is ask Jennifer to introduce herself first, just 20 or 30 seconds or so.
Thanks, Brent. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Louie. I'm joining today from Phnom Penh, Cambodia. I serve as the Executive Director of Nexus for Development. We are a nonprofit organization working across Asia to unlock and accelerate capital to SMEs and social enterprises, delivering low carbon solutions for clean energy and clean water access. We essentially serve as a finance partner and debt capital provider through our impact funds. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Julie, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Brown. I'm currently taking this call today actually from our office in Lagos in Nigeria. I'm the Director of Operations and Finance for ImpactWater, and we have a blended model using both commercial sales and carbon finance to provide water purification systems to schools. We're currently working with about 30,000 schools in Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, providing safe drinking water to over 15 million children every day.
All right, thank you, Julie. Stephen, you're up.
Hi, everyone. This is Stephen Simek, and I'm the CEO and founder of Mowgli Technologies. And we are a Salesforce partner, really focused and dedicated on serving international development organizations, nonprofits, foundations, and impact investors that are seeking strategic and technical solutions to manage their organization's operations. A big part of our work since our founding in 2011 has been around helping carbon-focused organizations to systematize their operations. And we're Boulder-based, and have had the opportunity to work with some really incredible carbon-focused organizations in all corners of the world. So glad to be on the call today, and thanks to the TaroWorks team for inviting me.
All right, thanks, Stephen and Julie and Jennifer. I'm Brent Chisholm. I'm the CEO of TaroWorks. We are a platform for organizations with field teams in emerging markets who have to work with communities and underserved communities in offline areas and need a way to extend their customer relationship management system out into rural parts mostly. And as I sort of mentioned off the top, we have several organizations that are successfully using our system for carbon credits programs. And that was the sort of impetus for us, because we think more organizations could do something similar. So we're going to get started here. We have a quick poll to sort of understand who's on the webinar with us. So I'm going to ask my colleague Elaine to open the poll. So we'll take just a few seconds for you guys to please indicate your connection to carbon credits. While we do this, I want to do a few housekeeping, mention a few housekeeping things. First off, this webinar is being recorded. We were going to post the recording later on YouTube. This will be available later to everyone, and we'll email out the link to you. Secondly, everyone is on mute by default, but you can ask questions. In fact, we encourage you to ask questions by typing them in the questions module widget of GoToWebinar. And our plan is that we will have the panel talking for about 40 minutes or so, 40 or 45 minutes, and then we will go to the questions. So please, if you have questions along the way, please do type those into the sidebar. Great. So now that we're through that, hopefully we have the poll results up. It looks like largest number of organizations are thinking about pursuing carbon credits, with another couple of groups either helping or already doing carbon credit programs or implementing it. So kind of a good spread. And hopefully those organizations that have already done it, you can sort of chime in with some points or observations that we may not get to in the discussion. And those of you who are still thinking about it, if there are questions that you have that we haven't covered, please chime in with those. So, all right, so kind of moving into the panel discussion now. I wanted to start first by painting the picture of what's possible, and ImpactWater is really a great organization to do this. So Julie, can you please tell us about the ImpactWater carbon offset program and how it enables ImpactWater to achieve its mission and goals?
Sure, happy to share more. ImpactWater started actually working with clean cook stoves in 2008. And from doing that work and from our management's expertise working in carbon projects, we realized we started a pilot project in 2013 in Uganda, working on providing safe drinking water systems to schools, primarily through commercial sales. And then in about 2016, 2017, we started new offices in Kenya and Nigeria. And we realized to expand our impact that we would be able to provide safe drinking water systems to schools that were subsidized through carbon offsets. So through engaging in this work, we're now reaching 30,000 schools. And it's really exciting to see how our impact has grown exponentially over the last year. And seeing, especially when we talk about schools in Africa, about 66% of schools in the continent are public primary schools. And most countries are working on a budget of about $1 per student per year for the administrative expenses. So to be able to have this blended model where we sell water purification systems to schools, and we're also able to provide some primarily to public primary schools that are completely subsidized by carbon offset credits, has really allowed us to expand our impact.
So just to clarify, Julie, you are, for many of the schools you're working with, they are paying something for the systems that you are doing, but that amount that they're paying is a fraction of what the cost might be, and that difference is being made up with through the sales of carbon credits. Do I have that right?
That actually for our systems in Kenya and Nigeria, most are completely subsidized through carbon credits. But our systems in Uganda have all primarily been sold commercially.
Okay, so it's a mix. Jennifer, you work with a lot of organizations in I guess primarily in Asia. Do you see a similar pattern with them in terms of being able to use these programs to offset a significant portion of their costs, or is it one of many streams of finance that they're using to run their operations?
For the projects that we've supported, it's really been supplementary or complementary to other revenue streams. So we're working mainly with companies that are manufacturing or delivering a product, a household product, so a household water filter or an improved cook stove. And so this just complements the sales revenue that they're earning and allows them to either expand into new markets, and that's really the premise for the work that we're doing, that it allows them to scale the programs. So I guess in addition to the water filter projects that we're supporting and the improved cook stoves that I mentioned, we're also looking at biogas projects. And you're right, it's predominantly in Asia with a core focus in Southeast Asia, namely in Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Although our mission is to support the region more broadly.
Right, and it's an interesting range of perspectives we have here, because ImpactWater is operating mostly in Africa. Nexus, many of your partners are in Asia, and then Stephen, I believe that most of the organizations you've helped with this work are in Latin America. Is that correct?
Actually, no. We worked with organizations all the way from Southeast Asia to kind of mostly Eastern Africa to Central America. So
okay,
so a good spread of geographies and locations.
All around the world. So Jennifer, can you sort of stepping back from this sort of picture of what is possible, can you maybe give a quick little synopsis of how carbon offset markets work? And I guess you've talked about already some of the types of organizations that are tapping into them, but so maybe talking about the mechanics of how an organization that is generating offsets makes sure that those offsets are accepted by investors, and how they bring those to market for investors to find.
Sure. So I can speak specifically about the project cycle at Nexus and where we get involved in the different phases. So for the projects that we work with, many of them come to us at the eligibility stage, and where we are doing, a pre-screening essentially to determine whether or not the projects are eligible under gold standard or some other accreditation mechanism. We've also looked at projects in CDM as well, and we will work with them through the surveying process to ensure that they will meet the minimum criteria. And there are, I think, in addition to the technologies that I named, it's important to note that the gold standard and CDM look more broadly, at other energy efficiency technologies and waste handling and disposal, and then also land use change and forestry. So those are the other types of projects. But essentially our team provides the technical assistance that these projects would require to go through the different stages. So from pre-screening to screening and design, and then working alongside Gold Standard so that they're aware of the projects and the sustainable development contributions. And then we work with different parties at the validation stage, including external partners. But I think what's also important to note is that the project owner or developer is very well integrated into the process, and it does require time, so investments of time, capital, and human resources.
And so Jennifer, yeah, just sort of diving a little bit into the types of programs, I think you've said that you primarily work with interventions like water, cook stoves, those types. but then you also mentioned that agriculture programs work. Is the reason that you've focused on particular types of programs on Asia a need to just develop a base of expertise in a certain area, or are there other reasons you've chosen to emphasize the sectors and geographies that you have?
I think it's a mix of both. Our mission over the last 10 years has really been to focus on clean energy, clean cooking, and clean water solutions. It's where we see that there's a big gap for access to basic services in the region, and so that's been predominantly our focus. And I failed to mention earlier that in addition to the technical services that we're providing, we also have a sales team. So the projects are further supported to ensure that they're actually connected to the market and that their carbon credits are packaged in a way that it's, I guess, of interest to the potential buyers out there, whether they be wholesalers / retailers or individual buyers.
Let's dive into that a little bit. I think both you and Julie have some interesting perspectives on the buyers. Are most of the programs that you work with, are they working with a buyer that they've arranged in advance, or are they developing a program already and you're helping them find a buyer?
So in our case, it's definitely the latter of what you've mentioned. So our team that understands the carbon credit market, specifically the voluntary markets, very well. And so when we go through not just the eligibility in the first instance with the project, we're also trying to determine from an economics perspective if it makes sense for the project to pursue carbon finance, because there are some relatively high upfront costs that organizations need to be aware of that's related to the registration process. And so we would provide them color on what we think their credits could be purchased at in the market when it does get to that issuance stage. And that helps these projects to determine whether or not it's feasible.
Julie, how did you guys find your the investors who are buying the carbon credits from you?
We found our buyers before starting project activities.
Okay. And did you work with a partner, kind of like a Nexus for development, or were you able to do, or was ImpactWater able to do that directly?
ImpactWater is able to do this directly.
Okay. And then Stephen, I think one of Mowgli and TaroWorks customer Proyecto Mirador has also found a buyer. Do you know how that process came about?
Yeah, they've through a variety of different means, just through their networks and their relationships around the U.S. and I think internationally as well. But then over time, sort of shifted from sort of individual funders to working with corporations to be able to source funding for their carbon offsets, and probably one of their most well-known offset partners is Salesforce, and they actually offset the last portion of their server carbon for all their server systems that they run. They offset that over their project in Honduras.
Yeah, that's great. So I think then sort of one of the takeaways that I would have from this is that these programs take a lot of investment to set up and run, and that's both in terms of people, processes, and systems. So doing some upfront work with either through a partner or through kind of directly with other organizations is really important to make sure that you both have an understanding of how much the carbon credits will be worth and what the payoff period for the investment that you will make in terms of doing it. So actually at this point, we're gonna do another poll here, and I'm gonna ask Elaine to bring the poll up. And while everyone's voting, I'm going to sort of turn the conversation to you, Stephen. So I think as we sort of talked about is your organization, Mowgli, has built the carbon management programs at several different organizations. What would you say is needed both in terms of technology and process to make a program successful?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of factors. One thing that we like to always see with an organization that's saying, hey, we're ready to systematize our operations, is typically they've had some sort of a process running that may have been in Google Sheets or Excel or in another system, where they've sort of found the point where they hit its limits. And that limit might be either the number of households or stoves or solar systems that they're, water systems that they're tracking. Or it might be that they're scaling across different countries or regions within a country, and those systems really start to limit them. And that's maybe at the back office sort of tracking level of things. The other big challenge we see is a lot of organizations really want to go to the next level of systemization when they hit a point where their field operations require a lot of offline activity and allowing staff to navigate geographies and capture GPS points, get signatures, photos. Those are other factors that often drive organizations to go to more formalized systems. But before any of that starts, we've seen in the years of doing this work, there's more a process around understanding, what does success look like for that organization? This is a simple question that we always start with. What does success look like if a system is in place? And that often sort of drives creative responses, which is, we just need our teams to be more efficient, or we need to be able to quickly organize that data for our verification period that comes up at a certain point in the year, or our field staff is in so much pain because of, the offline scenarios that they find themselves in. We need something that works better there. The other piece that we typically do in those scenarios is map the life cycles. What's the life cycle of? In many cases, like you send out an inspector to a household or an institution to sort of go, hey, are you really eligible for the systems that are being put in place? And what are the steps along the way to start to finish for that person to do their job? And really mapping those things really starts to help to define, what are systems, what's the right part of their operations to systematize or not. And then the last piece that we always get into is defining what is called a user story. As a supervisor, I need a offline mobile to be able to access information and do my job offline. Those are some of the key questions that we ask to really sort of define, is an organization ready? What does that look like when the systemization process comes? But let me step back one step even further. We've seen over and over again organizations succeed or fail with systems by kind of a simple concept. Is their leadership really bought into using those systems? If their leadership is committed to it, obviously they need to approve the funding for it. They need to influence the staff members who are going to sort of guide and define and then ultimately use those systems. But more importantly, if those leaders aren't using those systems to lead their teams, we've just seen that a lot of organizations will fail because if leadership isn't sort of saying, hey, your job, your day, your work is dependent on you successfully using these systems, then we've seen organizations not be successful. And those ones that do have that senior level commitment, they are incredibly successful because their business, really drives and defines itself by the successful use of those systems. And flip that around the other way, if you put really good and what we call appropriate technology in the hands of staff and employees that helps them do their job, then those systems will be adopted more successfully. And that may not be a smartphone in some cases. It may actually be a very old, proven piece of technology, which is, pen and paper. But how do you get the information on that pen and paper quickly into a scalable system? That's also a piece of the strategy. So, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but those are some of the tricks of the trade that we've seen over, 8.5 years of doing this kind of work, especially around carbon projects.
Yeah, it's interesting from the poll results here. We see a mix of organizations using pencil and paper, maybe a few already using mobile data collection, a few thinking of getting started. Julie, I know that ImpactWater uses TaroWorks, obviously, but you have a sister company that uses, I think, pen and paper, you told me. So can you maybe talk about the factors that have gone into the decisions at those different types of programs as to whether or not it makes sense to use just a mobile collection tool as opposed to just pen and paper?
Yeah, happy to. Something I think that we talked about briefly too, of carbon projects work off of, I call it the carbon rule book when speaking with our team, the POADD, the PDD. And sometimes when creating a carbon offset project, you create guidelines of what's going to be accepted in an audit depending on the different methodology. So for our sister company, we had said that there would be a paper receipt that's signed by the end user of the cook stove project. So that's something that we have to have, and that's why we can't have an electronic mobile app. In some ways, it would be double work, that if we already need this paper receipt created, then why should we have a mobile app to collect that data? Even though sometimes that document was probably created in 2008, and we question why did we do that when it would have been easier to have a mobile app to collect that information. But for ImpactWater, part of our installation process, maintenance and repair, we have started using TaroWorks for that.
So what it sounds like you're saying is it's very important in the definitional work up front that if you want to use a mobile app, you need to establish that will be a thing that you're going to use. Otherwise, you may find yourself sort of locked into a process that doesn't allow that. Is that a fair assessment?
Exactly. Yes.
Jennifer, you've seen a lot of different programs. This sort of the use of technology or newer technology like mobile versus older technology like pencil and paper. What do you see organizations doing both today and what their sort of new programs are moving towards?
So I'd say it's a mix. There's a couple of projects that have, fully switched over to collecting data for their surveys, through smartphone apps, and then they're uploading the data to the cloud, which is much easier for us because then we can download it and analyze it for the results. I think that there are some projects that are still relying on pen and paper. And obviously Excel and whatnot. But I think as a partner, having the ability to analyze that data when it's as it's being collected, it also just facilitates a much more efficient process for us.
Yeah. So I actually want to sort of like take that and go into the next direction, but I want to put a call out for questions here. We're about halfway through the webinar now, and if you have questions, please type them in the question box. We'll be getting to those in about another 15 minutes or so. I have a couple more topics that we're going to touch on, but please ask your questions now if you have them, and we'll get to them here shortly. So sort of, Julie, I'm sorry, Jennifer, taking that point about making it easier to work with having the data, what types of kind of compliance and audit requirements do the certifying bodies or investors require from organizations that are running these programs? Is there, and I guess actually maybe we should step back and talk about what types of certifying bodies are out there just in general. Can you kind of chat maybe about both what types of certifications there are and what the requirements are that for data and for the information that programs are collecting?
Sorry, so you're talking about what type of data is being audited, Brent? Sorry, perhaps I've misunderstood.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of jumbled the question. Maybe first talk about what the certification bodies are. So like the gold standard certification body and the other types, and then sort of more generally about what types of information they require programs to track in order to comply with the requirements needed to sell these carbon offsets into either investors or on a market.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we mainly work under Gold Standard Foundation, but there are numerous other methodologies that are out there. And there is actually a resource that we will be circulating after this that provides a really good comparison table. But happy to, to name a few others that are there if it's helpful. But there are, I'd say, different mechanisms that are also specific to geographies. So what's great about Gold Standard is it, from a geographical perspective, it's projects globally are eligible, but there are country-specific ones, and even ones that are specific to states, like California and the joint that they have with Quebec. But I think outside of that, with regards to the data that's being collected, and when we look at the eligibility criteria, we're looking for things such as double counting, early consideration and additionality, understanding what the sustainable development contribution is. So, at a minimum, an impact to SDG 13 for emission reductions, and the potential for the project to scale. We spend a lot of time, I would say, analyzing the sales forecasts of these projects, because if they're unable to sell a certain number of units, it's hard for them to get to that level where they are essentially reducing emissions per year by a threshold. And we usually apply a 10,000 tons of CO2 or equivalent emission per year as sort of that minimum scale threshold. With regards to, I guess, other bodies, we work with various different auditors in the market to help provide the validation and in the process, but do a lot of the legwork to facilitate the dialogues. I hope that answers your question, Brent. Perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. And I think maybe Julie will turn to you and give the example from ImpactWater of like, so I think Jennifer kind of gave the high level landscape. What at ImpactWater, what types of things do you have to track, and what types of data requirements do you have from your either investors or certifying bodies?
Yeah, that for ImpactWater is definitely very much in the weeds of things, that we're collecting information on every school, that every water purification system needs to have a unique serial number. We ensure that number is unique through Salesforce. We have a unique ID number for each school, that we have to get a signed copy of the purchase order from every school with the carbon waiver rights signed by a school administrator. Then we also have a delivery note for the school tracking when was the system installed, when did the maintenance and repair happen. So we keep a paper trail of all of that per the requirements of our PDD. And then we also store all the information in Salesforce, and that makes up our database that would be assessed by an auditor.
Right, so that's a lot of information to organize, and I imagine particularly with the need for a unique identifier, that's something that we've seen other organizations use, technologies like barcode scanning and similar to facilitate that type of work. Is that something that you guys are using technology for that at that type of level, or is it a people-based process still?
Right now, we're definitely more of a people-based process. We've considered having barcode scanners, but for one kind of water purification system that we have, our Ultra Tab, we have chlorine tablets, and we would need a unique identifier for each pack of 110 packs of that can treat 10,000 liters of water. So for that level, it doesn't make sense for us to move to a barcode. And that's why sometimes we do find ourselves, we we see ourselves as a technology forward organization, but sometimes the pen and paper approach or more human resource approach, it makes more sense for us right now. But as we scale, we think we'll definitely be investing more and more in technology.
Great. So just a final couple questions, and then we'll open it to Q&A here. So please type in your questions now. So Jennifer, as things have been laid out here on the people, programs, and process side, there's a lot of complexity to it. And my understanding is that Nexus has a team that helps organizations with the development of the programs, both in terms of the sort of implementing plan and then in designing it for the regulatory standards. Can you talk a little bit about the types of actors like Nexus and in other regions as well that are there that can help an organization who may not have the experience that ImpactWater did going into this, but can help an organization that has a carbon reducing program work their way through all the various requirements to do it? Like who's out there to help if for an organization that's interested but may not have the expertise in-house to do it?
I think what makes Nexus, I guess, unique is that as a not-for-profit organization, we spend a lot of time trying to just help projects make decisions about whether or not to move forward with carbon project development. I think that there are, a few other players that are much bigger in scale, but I also think that just by nature, because they're more for-profit driven, I don't necessarily know that they would provide the type of technical assistance that our organization really aims to support. We actually used to work in Africa as well on clean cook stoves, and then made a decision to focus more on Asia, simply because that's where we're physically located and felt much closer to the projects that we're trying to support by narrowing down our focus. But I would say that many of our partners, whether it be here or in Africa, have noted the lack of support out there. And it is, I think, it is a complex idea to grasp, and to figure out how to implement it and where to start. We do answer a lot of relatively basic questions, and are happy, to be in that role. And we have resources like eligibility criteria, which we provide, and questionnaires that we provide at the very outset when engaging with a project, to help them just figure out and understand, what they should be thinking about, and understanding what types of data they need to have, and start collecting, because I don't think that all of the projects really have a appreciation in the beginning for how much, again, going back to that investment component, and that organization.
Yeah, I think these are not quick bang for your buck projects. I don't think it seems from what you've shared with me that it will pay off for organizations. I mean, I think ImpactWater is a great example of that, but it's a multi-year process to both deploy it and then recoup the advantages of investment, and then being able to use it to fund your program. It's not a get rich quick scheme, it seems.
Right, but you're absolutely also correct in saying that it can be, a relatively lucrative endeavor. We've had a couple of, I'd say, very successful projects, that over, a couple of years, were able to generate sales revenue from their carbon credit or carbon offsets, anywhere from, $3 to $5 million, which has been amazingly helpful, of course, for them to continue scaling their very meaningful programs and organizations.
And I think, I'm not sure if it was you, Jennifer, who told me this, or someone else, but that the programs that we're talking about here, cook stoves, biodigesters, ones that are helping underserved communities, those carbon credits, while they have a certain economic value, also have a corporate social responsibility value, for example. I think, as Stephen pointed out, Proyecto Mirador has a lot of value to Salesforce in terms of, because they were using Salesforce using an organization that's offsetting its emissions was very well aligned. But that beyond just the economic value of the carbon credits, there are advantages to the offsets that are generated from programs that make them attractive to certain types of investors. Does that match your experience, or is it really just a price per carbon offset generated?
No, I would agree with that there is, almost this social aspect to carbon credits. And, we've noticed that there are specific sectors that are much more engaged by trying to offer, carbon neutral offerings to even their clients who end up becoming, what I'd say are, the end I guess, buyers of these credits, specifically sectors like the financial sector, food sector, for a longstanding amount of time. And then even now, more recent trends, the tourism sector, hotels, airlines, and energy and transportation, of course. So.
Got it. So, and then just to kind of close, so we've talked about the sort of investment involved and the decisions needed on the sort of design and people side. Stephen, can you talk about, like, in your experience, what decisions are needed on the technology side to enable these programs? I mean, those decisions might be to use pencil and paper, they might be to use mobile devices. Can you kind of talk about what's the decision making that an organization should be thinking about when considering something like that?
Yeah, and I'll just add on to what Jennifer just shared a moment ago, which is, I think there's the other places. Governments have always been long supporters of carbon programs. So I think I've seen the German and Dutch governments have actually funded some projects and programs that we've worked with as well. By the way, can you hear me okay, Brent? I lost you there for just a second.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I think to answer your question, I think there's always the time value of money question for any of these projects, and I think there's that simple point where an organization is in enough pain in their operations that they say it's time for more mature systems, and those, again, whether it's pen and paper, whether it's laptops and some sort of a system, or if it's getting into really advanced offline mobile systems that are tied to the cloud, like TaroWorks. We found that one of the, our Mowgli SMS app has really served this space quite well because it allows people to meet their stakeholders where they are. A lot of our partners who are deploying these systems and providing these programs, whether it's a mud hut in Africa, whether it's a little brick house in Honduras, or something else, a lot of those folks may not have running water, may not have electricity, but they all have a phone. And we found that text messaging over the years, and it's kind of fun to be on the call in this webinar with Julie. One of the first places we ever used our text messaging app for carbon was in 2013 with an earlier iteration of their organization, and that was around enabling the team members who are out in the field to connect and communicate, but doing so from Salesforce, giving the sales reps a way to send reminders ahead of time to places where they're delivering the water systems, to reminders, it's time to clean your chimney, or it's time to replace your water filter, or it's time to do some sort of maintenance on your biogas system. The meeting the stakeholders where they are, whether they're the end users of those systems, whether it's the staff who's out and about in the field, that has been really a key piece of a lot of our systems, is knowing where they are and how to enable them with the right kind of technology. And one of the biggest pieces of that is communication. what we've been able to do with Proyecto Mirador in Honduras, for example, is use text messaging to actually activate a stove record inside of Salesforce. So text in the stove ID that activates that stove record that says start counting carbon credits now, which then leads to another piece, which all of a sudden starts a little text education drip campaign to that household owner. Hey, here's, welcome to your new stove. And over time, the reminders to do certain maintenance, or even a little lifeline to say, hey, something's not right. And text, if you will, text a case that says, hey, something's not right. Here's the information that is relevant. And then a staff member can follow up appropriately. So I think a lot of these questions come down to sort of, where's the pain threshold of, hey, we're inefficient, or hey, if we're to scale, we need to be able to scale quickly and efficiently, and what's the best way to connect with staff. We've seen WhatsApp as one of the fastest growing use cases for our communications app, being able to connect with people over WhatsApp around those education reminders or notifications, or hey, I need help with my system. Those have been some of the things that either push or pull technology into an organization.
Great overview. Okay, so now we're going to move to the Q&A section, and Elaine has been compiling the questions that you've all submitted. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and she will moderate the questions for us here. Elaine, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for getting your questions in. Just a reminder that you can continue adding your questions in the Q&A section as I go through some of the ones you've already submitted. So this question is for you, Julie. This is from Ann Canavati. From a carbon accounting perspective, how do the drinking water projects qualify? So how do they offset a metric ton of carbon?
That's a good question. Of course, this depends on the methodology, but what we see in Africa is schools primarily use boiling to purify their water. And we see that the UN has declared that safe drinking water is a human right. And if schools were to use some kind of technology to purify their water, that boiling is the most readily accessible. And boiling water, that the average school that we work with has 514 students. So to boil 1 liter of water at a minimum per student per school day is about boiling enough water that would fill up a Volkswagen car, of thinking about that quantity. So boiling water produces a huge amount of carbon emissions.
Just as a side note, I had the good fortune to visit ImpactWater in Uganda a few months ago, and the piles of wood at some of the schools that they were using for cooking were truly tremendous. Really large piles of wood that are being burned.
I guess, Julie, on that note, we have a related question from Ronald and Pear. So the question is around what kind of data should he use to track to make it easy to get through the verification bodies. So I guess, like, how did you choose that particular thing to track, or yeah, how did you choose, or what are the other options? Yeah.
What we track exactly, what data points we track for our schools?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all of that's defined before the project even starts in the PDD. So there are some questions that would be expected of any project, like, for example, who's the end user? But then that we have that for both our cook stove projects and our safe drinking water projects. But other details are, or for example, the installation date, that's needed to see for how long has the technology been offsetting carbon emissions. So all of that's defined when the project has started and going through all the different regulatory and approval steps. And so once all those steps have been gone through, then those technologies that have been given after that date of once a letter of approval is secured, from that point, you can start installing systems and creating emission reductions.
Great, thanks. Also, kind of related to that, we have a question for you, Julie, about just ImpactWater in general, if you can elaborate on how the water treatment systems work.
Oh, sure. In fact, we have 4 primary water purification systems that we provide schools with. Initially, we were working with UV water treatment systems in Uganda and then in Kenya and Nigeria. Our UV systems require electricity, and we saw that was limiting for a lot of schools that don't have a source of electricity or pressurized water. So our 2 systems that we primarily use is our UltraFlow, which is an automated residual chlorine water purification system, and that does not need an electrical source, but it needs pressurized water. And then we also have the UltraTab, which are simply chlorine tablets that we use, usually providing 100-liter water purification tanks to the schools. And the schools just put in that simple chlorine tablet. So that works with any water source, no electricity as well.
Great, hope that helps. Okay, and a question for maybe Stephen and Julie, based on your experience, kind of either building systems or using systems. We have a question from Harry Clemens. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it has to do with the cost. So in his case, they run a carbon project in rural areas, very geographically spread with many data collectors. And they're seeing high costs of licenses and high costs of systems in general. So how do you justify this cost for these programs? Like, what is the value, would you say, in having a system?
I can start. I think and hi Harry, by the way. I think there's a lot of factors that go into cost, and one of the sort of essential ones is around the amount of staff and effort that goes into managing and processing data. We've seen with most of our clients that there comes a breaking point of the amount of staff effort to do, for example, just simply the carbon calculations for a verification period. One of our clients used to take them 3 months of preparation in Excel spreadsheets, and we were able to drop that down to just a couple weeks of very light review and preparation. That was a significant time savings for staff, as well as probably the biggest one was just the stress of getting that information ready. There's a lot of different ways to organize licenses and systems, and I think it just has to be a very careful calculation of staff and users to coordinate the best mix of those things. And I think the other challenge is, again, at the end of the week, the month, the year, when you have to roll up data potentially across multiple countries, having access to that data real time allows you to stay ahead of your programs versus getting to the end of the year and doing the hard work in Excel and finding that you may have missed a goal. Some of those systems allow our organizations to really stay on top of their programs, to make mid-moment refinements, tweaks, changes. So it's not so much a reactionary system, but a system that helps them to stay progressive and ahead and nimble in competitive carbon markets. So I hope that helps. And I think it really also just depends on the organization, the size and scale, whether you're a small organization or a multinational organization. Those are just part of the calculus of what's the right mix of systems and staffs to accomplish your goals.
Thanks. Julie, do you have anything to add about how you made the decision for investing in a system?
Sure. And this for us, it's an iterative process. That I'm with our team right now in Nigeria, and we're even working with some schools in River State up in the Delta region of Nigeria with a huge amount of conflict. Sometimes we're sending technicians up on canoes, and they're traveling for a day to reach a school. It's not, yeah, I definitely relate of reaching those more remote schools. It's really challenging for us, or even in the northern region of Nigeria as well. That even sometimes for us doing water quality testing in both Kenya and Nigeria, we have to send someone on a plane ride for an hour and a half to do that testing. So a part of our mission is we believe that every student has the right to safe drinking water, and we're trying to reach those hard to reach schools at the bottom of the pyramid, but it definitely can be a challenge. And actually, even for us, we find the pen and paper approach with our surveyors that works better in the more rural areas. So it's a challenge that we're working through as well.
I'd just like to add one more little piece to that question, that there's also organizations need to be aware of the sort of the indirect costs associated with having systems. And sometimes that's, having the right type of staff in place to, if you are getting into deploying or delivering mobile systems, having staff that's capable and prepared to service, train, maintain, again, whether it's just laptops or mobile devices, that can quickly swap out systems that are either stolen or broken. There's some different strategies to explore around making sure that the hardware side of things is successful, and more importantly, the people side of things is successfully sort of trained, so that you have high adoption rates and successful use of systems. And again, sometimes as just mentioned, pen and paper is sometimes the best tool for the environment. We've seen in some cases it's not so much a cost issue, but a safety issue, where if a person goes in with a mobile device or a laptop into a certain region, their life may be at risk because someone may attack them or hurt them to get that device. So those are some of the other conditions that need to be kind of evaluated before sticking a fancy device into somebody's hand. Beyond just the use of it, can it be maintained and supported, and is the safety of that person well tended to if they are using something like that?
Great, thanks. Maybe I'll close out with some sort of high-level industry questions. So Jennifer, I'll turn to you. How would these organizations and the markets be different if they're targeting compliance carbon markets and not voluntary markets?
I'm probably, to be honest, not the best person to speak to that. I wonder if maybe Julie can talk to that, just because my focus has really been more on studying GS, so I don't know. Apologies to pass this back to you, Julie.
It's all good. That, if I understand the question correctly, of what's the difference between voluntary markets and compliance markets?
Yeah, and how might your organization be different or work differently if you're targeting the compliance market instead?
Yep. We work with both, that some of the differences that I see, we work with GS and CDM with the UN framework. That for gold standard, we see a big emphasis when we're doing our monitoring on what the social impact is of the project, that we do see different monitoring requirements, even though they're the same systems, same data points that we're collecting for both. Yeah, just more gold standard emphasizes what are the social impacts for the beneficiaries of the project, while CDM with the UN framework is more about following that rule book that you started at the beginning of the project and making sure that all those data points are met, that there's not as many qualitative questions with the UN. So we're collecting, I think probably 90% of the information is the same, but just with some questions that are added on for gold standard that we don't collect for CDM.
All right, thank you very much, Julie. And we are at time, so it's gonna wrap up the webinar here. The panelists have very generously offered to make themselves available. If you have questions, you see all of the email addresses here. We will also be posting a recording of this webinar to YouTube, so if you want to rewatch parts of it or share it with colleagues. And then likely we will also publish a sort of synopsis and follow-up article as well. So thanks again to Jennifer, Julie, and Stephen for joining us, and thank you to the attendees for calling in. And hopefully this has helped inform some of the decisions that you'll need to make. And this is a very knowledgeable panel of experts, and so if I think if you have further questions, they would be great people to engage with. So thanks very much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.